12 people went to a midnight movie and never came home. The killer wasn't hiding in the shadows. He walked in through the front door, fully armed, fully prepared. This wasn't just a mass shooting. It was a carefully orchestrated ambush. Planned by a neuroscience student with a secret obsession. The night of July 20th, 2012, began like any other for moviegoers in Aurora, Colorado. Excitement buzzed in the air as hundreds gathered for the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises. Among the crowd at the Century 16 Theater was James Holmes, a quiet 24-year-old graduate student. He bought a ticket, walked in, and took a seat in the front row of Theater 9. What no one knew was that Holmes wasn't there to enjoy the film. He left the theater through a side emergency exit, propped it open, and returned minutes later, dressed head to toe in tactical gear. With a gas mask on and music blasting through his headphones, Holmes tossed a canister of tear gas into the crowd. Confusion turned to terror as the smoke filled the air and he opened fire. He used 3 weapons, a shotgun, an assault rifle, and a handgun. Chaos erupted. Screams drowned out the movie as bullets tore through the audience. Some people thought it was a stunt for the film. Others froze, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. Within seconds, the theater transformed into a scene of carnage. Holmes fired indiscriminately at the aisles, the walls, and the fleeing bodies. A bullet pierced through the wall and struck moviegoers in the adjacent Theater 8. In just over a minute, he fired 76 shots. The floor was slick with blood. 10 people died instantly. Others clung to life as emergency calls flooded 911. Police were on scene in less than 90 seconds. Amid the screams and sirens, they arrested Holmes without a fight in the parking lot behind the theater. He was calm, detached, dressed like a SWAT officer. For a moment, officers thought he was one of their own. Then they found the weapons, and the nightmare became clear. Inside Holmes' car, police found more ammunition, a gas mask, and spike strips. I'd come prepared for a battle that never happened. Back at his apartment, another horror awaited. Holmes had wired his home with deadly traps, explosives, gasoline, and grenades, rigged to kill first responders. Police used a robot to safely dismantle the bomb setup. If someone entered without warning, the entire building could have gone up in flames. In total, 12 people died, including a 6-year-old girl and an unborn baby. 70 more were injured, some paralyzed, others blind, or suffering lifelong trauma. Among the victims was Jessica Gawi, an aspiring sports journalist, who had survived a separate shooting in Toronto just weeks earlier. Ashley Moser, who lost her daughter Veronica, was shot multiple times and later suffered a miscarriage from her injuries. Caleb Medley, a young comedian, was shot in the face. He spent weeks in a coma and emerged unable to speak, walk, or feed himself. The carnage shocked a nation. Families held vigils, clinging to hope, while the world watched in grief and disbelief. President Obama visited Aurora, offering comfort and sorrow. Flags were lowered. Theaters across America tightened security overnight. For survivors, the pain didn't end when the shooting stopped. Physical wounds healed slowly. Emotional scars ran even deeper. The Century 16 Theater closed for months. When it reopened in 2013, Room 9 had been restructured, but, for many, it would never feel the same. What was supposed to be a night of entertainment became one of the darkest tragedies in modern U.S. history. And it was only the beginning of a long, painful road to justice.
James Holmes wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. No arrests, no history of violence. Just a withdrawn, highly intelligent student whose mind had begun to unravel. He once thrived in academics, earning a prestigious spot in the neuroscience PhD program at the University of Colorado. But by the summer of 2012, everything had changed. Holmes began to slip into darkness. He isolated himself, dropped out of school, and started seeing a campus psychiatrist. But even therapy couldn't stop what was coming. His journal, later found by police, revealed a descent into madness. Page after page detailed plans for a massacre methodical, cold, and void of empathy. Holmes called himself the Joker and saw the theater as his stage, the audience, unwitting participants in a performance of death. The prosecution would later argue that Holmes wasn't insane. He was obsessed with notoriety. He wanted to kill simply to feel something. But the defense painted a different picture. A severely mentally ill man whose grip on reality had shattered. A man tormented by delusions and psychosis. The trial began in April 2015 and became one of the most expensive and emotionally charged in Colorado's history. Survivors took the stand. Families wept. Some jurors cried openly as photos of the crime scene were shown. Blood-stained seats, abandoned popcorn bags. The silence of a life interrupted. Holmes sat motionless through it all. No visible remorse, no emotion, just a vacant stare that disturbed even seasoned courtroom veterans. The prosecution sought the death penalty. They said Holmes made a choice, a deliberate, evil decision to murder innocent people. The defense asked for mercy. They didn't deny the crime, but insisted Holmes was too mentally ill to be executed. That justice didn't require his death. After months of testimony, the jury agreed on guilt, but not on death. Holmes was spared execution by a single juror who couldn't support it. He received 12 life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each person he murdered, plus 3,318 years for the injuries and attempted murders. It wasn't the ending everyone wanted. Some families felt robbed of true justice. Others were simply relieved the trial was over. In the aftermath, Colorado re-examined its mental health systems. Could this have been prevented? Should someone have seen the signs? The psychiatrist who treated Holmes later testified that she was concerned. But confidentiality laws limited what she could report. That ethical dilemma still haunts the state. How do we protect privacy while preventing tragedy? Today, Holmes sits in a maximum security prison, alone, forgotten by most, but not by the families whose lives he shattered. The scars of Aurora remain in the hearts of survivors, in the eyes of those who lost someone, and in a nation still searching for answers.
The echoes of that July night still linger not just in Aurora, but across a country gripped by a repeating nightmare. Mass shootings no longer shock, they scar. For survivors, the pain didn't end when the gunfire stopped. PTSD, survivors' guilt, sleepless nights filled with memories they never asked to carry. One young woman, who lost her best friend in the attack, later said, "It's not just that they died. It's that I lived and I don't know why." For families, justice felt incomplete. Life sentences can't bring back a daughter, a father, a 6-year-old child who just wanted to see a superhero movie. The theater was remodeled and reopened, but some locals never returned. The building stood not as entertainment but as a tombstone made of bricks and silence. In the years since, some survivors found strength in advocacy. They speak at schools, campaign for gun reform, and use their grief as a catalyst for change. Others withdrew completely. Trauma doesn't follow a schedule. It lingers in shadows, waiting to resurface in moments least expected. The shooting also reignited fierce national debates about gun control, mental health care, and the very definition of justice in an age of mass violence. Colorado had already lived through Columbine. Aurora reopened wounds that had barely healed. The question became, how many more? Lawmakers passed stricter gun laws. Background checks were expanded. But the political battle lines remained the same, divided, heated, and often immovable. The tragedy also forced a reckoning in psychiatry. Could Holmes have been stopped? Or had the system been too slow, too cautious to intervene? Some mental health professionals pushed for change, urging better communication between clinicians and authorities when public safety is at risk. Yet others warned of overreach. Would diagnosing potential killers turn into profiling? Could the stigma around mental illness grow even stronger. Meanwhile, Holmes remains in near total isolation. No interviews, no public statements, just a ghostly figure in a cage, far from the chaos he caused. His silence speaks volumes, not of remorse but of a mind still unreachable, still hidden behind a wall no one has managed to tear down. Aurora became more than a headline. It became a symbol of vulnerability, of a nation unsure how to protect its own without sacrificing freedom. And yet, amid the grief, stories of resilience emerged. Survivors who ran back into the theater to help others, parents who turned their loss into purpose. The names of the victims are now etched in stone at memorials and whispered in prayers. Their stories, short as they were, refused to be forgotten. In the end, the Aurora shooting left behind more than death. It left questions, wounds, and a haunting reminder: the real horror wasn't in the film that night. It was in the darkened theater, where fiction and nightmare became indistinguishable.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a really tough subject. The mass shooting in Aurora, Colorado, back on July 20, 2012.
Yeah, it's a heavy one.
It is. Our main source here is the Wikipedia article covering the tragedy. We want to go through the timeline, obviously, but also try to understand, the immediate impact, the aftermath, the legal side of things.
Basically get a clearer picture of what happened and why it still matters.
Exactly. And it's important right from the start to remember the human element here.
Absolutely. These aren't just facts. It's about real people, immense suffering, a community hit hard.
Definitely. Okay, so let's set the scene. It happened at the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora. The timing was somewhere between about 12:38 a.m. and 12:45 a.m. Mountain Time.
During that midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises.
Right. Big event. And the audience, mostly young adults, out for the movie release. But there were kids there too.
Which just makes it even more horrifying. This, safe space for fun turned into something else entirely.
Yeah, the violence invading such an ordinary, everyday thing, it's chilling.
That vulnerability, places we think are safe.
So the shooter was James Holmes, 24 years old at the time. He came in dressed in tactical gear, heavily armed.
Okay, let's talk about the weapons.
Yeah. He set off 2 tear gas grenades first, then started shooting into Theater 9. He had a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 sport rifle, a semi-automatic.
With a 100-round drum magazine attached.
Right, a huge magazine, though apparently that malfunctioned during the attack.
Yeah, that's a detail that came out. But still, he also had a Remington 870 shotgun, a 12-gauge tactical model.
And a Glock handgun.
Yeah.
A .40 caliber.
Yeah.
So multiple firearms designed for exactly this kind of horrific event.
The rifle, especially with that kind of magazine, points to aiming for mass casualties very quickly. Even with the malfunction, the intent behind bringing it is clear.
And the planning. This is where it gets really disturbing. He actually bought a ticket, went into the theater, sat down, front row.
Right. Blended in initially.
Then, maybe 20 minutes into the film, he leaves through an emergency exit. Props it open.
Doesn't just leave. He props it open. That's significant.
Totally. Goes to his car, which is parked right nearby, gets changed into all this gear, grabs the weapons, and comes back in through that same door. This is maybe, half an hour into the movie?
So this was thought out, step by step.
Completely. He's wearing a gas mask, vest, helmet, bullet-resistant leggings, protectors for his throat and groin, tactical gloves.
A whole setup.
And, get this, listening to music on headphones.
Yeah.
Like he's trying to block out the reality of what he's about to do.
That detail, the headphones, it suggests a profound detachment, doesn't it? Insulating himself.
It really does. And the gear, it's not just protection. It's an image. Intimidating, dehumanizing maybe.
Yeah. And the initial reaction inside the theater.
Yeah.
Oh, people didn't immediately grasp what was happening.
No, a lot of them thought it was like a publicity stunt for the movie.
Or special effects, or maybe just someone in a really elaborate costume. It was a Batman premiere, after all.
Right. You can almost understand the confusion just for a moment before the horror sets in.
That disbelief, it speaks volumes about how unthinkable this kind of violence feels in a normal setting. Our brains just don't compute it immediately.
So the attack itself, he throws one of the tear gas canisters towards the left side of the theater, creates chaos, smoke.
Immediate panic, hard to say.
Then he fires the shotgun. First shot reportedly at the ceiling.
Maybe to get attention or just adding to the terror.
Hard to say. Then he starts firing into the audience.
Yeah.
Shotgun, then the rifle. He fires towards the back, towards people trying to run up the aisles.
Just indiscriminate firing into the crowd.
In total,
Oh.
76 shots, 6 from the shotgun, 65 from the rifle, even with the malfunction, and 5 from the handgun.
76 rounds in that enclosed space. Devastating.
And one bullet actually went through the wall into the theater next door, Theater 8. Same movie playing.
Wow. Just shows how dangerous and uncontrolled it was. Could have been even worse.
Now, the police response. It was fast. The first 911 calls actually came in around midnight, before the shooting even started.
Really? Before? Why?
The reports don't specify exactly why, maybe something else entirely, but calls were coming in. Once the shooting started, though, around 12:39 a.m., police were on scene within like 90 seconds.
Incredible response time.
Really incredible. They found the discarded magazines, the weapons on the floor. People were actually using social media, tweeting, posting about it as it happened.
In the middle of all that chaos?
Yeah.
Wow.
Ambulances, though, they had trouble getting in. The parking lot was just jammed.
Logistics in a crisis. Always a challenge.
Holmes was arrested pretty quickly, around 12:45 a.m. Outside behind the theater near his car, he didn't resist at all.
Just gave up.
Yeah. Described as being calm, maybe disconnected. He was still in all the gear, so initially some officers thought he might be another cop.
Understandable, given the tactical clothing. That quick arrest, though, likely saved lives. Prevented him from doing anything else.
For sure. There was also that initial story, you'll probably remember it, about him calling himself the Joker.
Right, and the red hair. That was everywhere in the news early on.
Came from a couple of federal officials, apparently.
Yeah.
But the DA later said, no, that Joker part wasn't true. His hair, though, when he showed up in court a few days later, it did look reddish-orange.
So the hair part was real, the Joker claim maybe not. Still, that image stuck in the public mind.
It really did.
Yeah.
Tied into the whole Batman movie context.
Whether it was intentional or not, it shaped the narrative early on.
Then there's the apartment. After the arrest, Holmes told the police he'd booby-trapped his place.
Seriously, as if the shooting wasn't enough.
Yeah. It was about 5 miles away near the University of Colorado Medical Center complex. Police went in, very carefully, obviously, and found, well, over 30 homemade grenades. Like improvised bombs filled with gasoline.
30? Oh my God.
All wired to a control box as death trap. Neighbors said they heard super loud music coming from his apartment that night, maybe to cover sounds or lure someone, who knows.
Just chilling. And they found a Batman mask there, too.
Yeah, inside the apartment.
Uh-huh.
Another disturbing link, however you interpret it. It showed this wasn't just contained to the theater. He intended more harm.
A whole other level of planning and just disregard for life.
The final toll.
Yeah.
It's just awful. 13 people died.
Including an unborn baby.
Yes. And 70 others were injured. 58 by the gunfire itself, 4 from the tear gas, and 8 people got hurt just trying to flee the chaos.
70 injured. That number was staggering at the time. The highest number of injuries in a U.S. mass shooting up to that point.
And in Colorado, it was the deadliest shooting since Columbine. Just devastating numbers representing real people, real families broken apart.
It's so important we don't forget that. Behind the numbers are lives.
We should really say their names.
Yeah.
Jonathan Blunk, Alexander J. Boyk,
Yeah.
Jesse Childress, Gordon Cowden, Jessica Gowie.
And she had survived another shooting before in Toronto. Unbelievable tragedy.
It's just awful. John Larimer, Matt McQuinn, Michaela Midek, Veronica Moser-Sullivan. She was only 6 years old.
6 years old. Heartbreaking.
Alex Sullivan, Alexander C. Teves, Rebecca Wingo, and Ashley Moser's unborn baby.
Remembering them is the least we can do. Acknowledging each life lost.
And the injuries. Many were incredibly severe. People treated at multiple hospitals. Some of the hospitals, to their credit, limited the costs or forgave the bills.
That's something, at least. A small measure of relief in the face of overwhelming trauma.
Ashley Moser, Veronica's mom, she was critically injured, became paraplegic, and lost her baby. Caleb Medley, severe brain damage, paralysis. Stefan Moten, also paralyzed.
Lifelong, devastating consequences.
But the community did respond. The Community First Foundation raised over $5 million for the victims and families. Families of those who died received, I think, $220,000 each.
Shows incredible generosity and solidarity. Financial help is vital, though of course it can't undo the harm.
No, of course not. Okay, let's shift to the legal side. Holmes' first court appearance was just 3 days later, July 23rd. Reports said he looked dazed, kind of out of it.
Yeah, I remember those images. Very vacant.
Formal charges came quickly. 24 counts of first-degree murder, 2 for each person killed, under different legal theories, and 116 counts of attempted first-degree murder.
A huge number of counts reflecting the scale of the attack.
A gag order was put in place almost immediately. Lawyers, police couldn't talk publicly about the case.
Pretty standard in high-profile cases like this to try and ensure a fair trial.
Right. And early on, his lawyers started indicating he was mentally ill, That was clearly going to be the core of the defense.
While the prosecution countered, alleging he'd told people he wanted to kill months before, setting up the main conflict of the trial right there.
There were some key legal fights before the main trial even started. Remember that notebook?
The one he reportedly sent to a psychiatrist.
Yeah. Supposedly detailed the attack plans. Huge fight over whether it was protected by doctor-patient privilege.
Right, a major hurdle for the prosecution initially.
And the defense actually offered a guilty plea to avoid the death penalty.
But the prosecution rejected it.
They did. They were determined to pursue the death penalty.
Which signaled how serious they were about seeking the maximum sentence.
So, the trial. It took forever just to pick a jury. Started in January 2015, lasted 3 months. They summoned something like 9,000 potential jurors.
9,000? That's immense. Shows how deeply this affected the community. Finding impartial jurors must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and there were even worries about people connected to Columbine, given the history in Colorado.
Understandable concern.
The trial finally began in April 2015. The defense didn't dispute that Holmes was the shooter. How could they?
Right. The evidence was overwhelming. Their whole case was about his mental state, insanity defense.
Exactly. Argued severe mental illness meant he wasn't legally responsible. The prosecution brought in survivors to testify. Incredibly powerful, emotional testimony.
Hard to even imagine what that must have been like.
And the notebook eventually did come into evidence. Both sides used it, trying to interpret it their way. Proof of planning versus proof of delusion.
A central piece of evidence, viewed through two completely different lenses.
Psychiatry became absolutely central. Court-appointed psychiatrists testified. They agreed he was mentally ill. Diagnoses mentioned were schizotypal personality disorder.
Which involves really unusual thinking patterns, social anxiety.
Right. And also schizoaffective disorder, which is sort of a mix of schizophrenia symptoms and mood disorder symptoms, like depression or mania.
So, clear diagnoses of serious mental illness.
Yes. But crucially, they testified that, in their opinion, he was legally sane when he committed the crime.
Meaning he knew what he was doing and knew it was wrong.
Basically, yeah. They believed he could form intent, understand the consequences. That's the legal standard, which is different from just having a mental illness diagnosis.
A critical distinction in court.
During the trial, several jurors actually got dismissed for different reasons. Misconduct, hearing outside information, things like that.
Not uncommon in long, high-profile trials, but it adds complexity.
Ashley Moser, Veronica's mom, was the prosecution's final witness.
Yeah.
Just devastating testimony. Holmes himself decided not to testify.
Which is his right, of course.
The defense showed videos of him, his behavior in jail, trying to support their argument about his mental state.
Trying to show the illness was profound and ongoing.
So the verdict, July 16th, 2015, guilty on all counts.
Every single charge.
Then came the sentencing phase, started July 22nd. The jury had to decide on the death penalty. They found the necessary aggravating factors, things that make the crime worse, legally speaking.
Like the number of victims, the cruelty.
Exactly. But they couldn't all agree. It has to be unanimous for the death penalty.
And they weren't unanimous.
No. So the death penalty was off the table. On August 7, 2015, the judge sentenced him. Life in prison, no possibility of parole, 12 consecutive life sentences, one for each murder victim he was convicted for.
Plus thousands more years for everything else.
Yeah, plus 3,318 years for all the attempted murders and the explosives. The judge was very clear. Holmes should never set foot in free society again. Said he deserved no sympathy.
A sentence ensuring he'd never be released, reflecting the severity but stopping short of execution due to the jury's decision.
The reaction outside the courtroom. Well, immediately after the shooting, there was a huge candlelight vigil. Massive outpouring of grief.
Community coming together.
President Obama ordered flags to half staff, came to Aurora to meet with victims, gave a national address. Leaders from all over the world sent condolences.
A global recognition of the horror.
The entertainment world reacted too, especially given the length of the movie. Warner Bros., the distributor, they were deeply saddened. Canceled premieres in Paris, Mexico City, Tokyo.
Scaled back the marketing, right?
Yeah, pulled ads, didn't release early box office numbers out of respect. Christopher Nolan, the director, called it savage. Christian Bale, Batman himself, visited victims privately.
A sensitive response from the studio and filmmakers?
And remember that trailer for Gangster Squad, another Warner Bros. Film? It had a scene with gangsters shooting up a movie theater.
Oh, wow, yeah. Terrible timing.
They pulled that trailer immediately, reshot the scene entirely for the final movie. DC Comics delayed a Batman comic release. Hans Zimmer, the composer for the Dark Knight films, wrote a piece called Aurora.
As a tribute.
Yeah, dedicated to the victims. Proceeds went to help them. Cinemark, the theater chain, they paid for the funerals.
That seems appropriate.
And they eventually reopened the theater in January 2013. Held a ceremony, but it was controversial. They did increase security at theaters nationwide after this.
Became a much more visible thing. Bag checks, security precautions, a lasting change.
Then came the civil lawsuits. Some victims sued Cinemark, arguing security was negligent.
Claiming the theater should have done more to prevent it.
Essentially, yeah. But those suits were mostly dismissed. Another suit by families in state court also found Cinemark wasn't liable.
Proving negligence in these cases is legally very difficult.
Cinemark initially tried to get the victims who sued them to pay their legal fees, which caused a huge backlash.
Yeah, that sounds like a PR nightmare. Did they back down?
They did eventually drop that claim. Separately, the estranged wife of one victim sued the University of Colorado.
Why the university?
Because Holmes had seen a university psychiatrist. The lawsuit argued the psychiatrist knew, or should have known, he was dangerous and had a duty to warn potential victims, referencing that Tarasoff ruling standard.
Ah, the duty to warn. Another complex legal area, exploring institutional responsibility.
Right. And for the community, the Aurora Strong Resilience Center was set up, offering therapy, support, recognizing the long-term trauma.
Crucial resource. Healing from something like this takes years, decades even. Lifetimes.
The shooting definitely sparked the gun control debate again. Big time.
As these events always do, focus on the types of weapons used.
Exactly. Semi-automatic rifles, high-capacity magazines. Interestingly, though, gun sales in Colorado actually went up right after the shooting.
That often happens. Fear drives people to want protection, maybe.
Could be. But polls back then suggested public opinion on gun control didn't really shift much overall, despite the horror.
It's such a deeply polarized issue in the U.S. These tragedies often reinforce existing beliefs rather than changing minds broadly.
There was also that no notoriety campaign, started by the parents of Alex Teves, one of the victims.
What was the goal there?
To get the media to stop focusing so much on the shooter, limit using his name, his picture. Their argument was that the intense media attention might inspire copycats who crave that kind of fame.
That's a really powerful point. Raises huge questions about media responsibility, the tension between reporting the news and potentially glorifying violence.
Definitely a tough ethical line for journalists. How do you cover it responsibly?
Still debated today.
What about the theater itself, the Century 16? It was rebranded, reopened as Century Aurora.
I remember there was opposition to reopening it.
Yeah, some families felt it was deeply inappropriate, but it did reopen. Theater 9, where the shooting happened, was actually combined with Theater 8 next door to make one big XD auditorium.
Erasing the specific physical space in a way.
And a memorial was eventually created, a park dedicated in 2018. It has 83 sculptures of birds. 13 of them represent those who died. A place for remembrance.
A dedicated space for reflection seems important.
One final, really disturbing point. There was a case in 2015, a man who murdered his family in Oklahoma. He apparently said he wanted his crime to be bigger, more notorious than Columbine and Aurora.
Oh, that's sickening. Explicitly referencing it as a benchmark?
Yeah, it just highlights this awful potential for a cycle of violence where notoriety itself becomes a goal, makes understanding the why and preventing glorification even more critical.
Truly chilling. The ripple effects are so complex and dark.
So wrapping up this deep dive, which has been, frankly, very difficult to talk through, we've covered the timeline, the attack, the immediate aftermath, the long legal process, and all the ways this tragedy continues to resonate.
From community healing to national debates.
Hopefully this gives you a fuller understanding of the event and its impact.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, of the potential for violence and the long road survivors and communities face afterward.
Absolutely. So, thinking about everything we've discussed, the arguments over sanity, the community response, the gun debate, the media ethics questions, what's the one aspect you think is most crucial for us to keep reflecting on? What piece, if we understood it better, might really help prevent future tragedies, or at least help us support affected communities more effectively?
That's a heavy question to leave people with.
It is, but maybe worth considering. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.